Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcasts. It's Bronwen Logan here from Reiki with Bronwen, and with me today is the lovely Carrie Varela from the Reiki Healing Society. Our other compatriot, colleague, Michaela, is having the week off. Lucky her, and or unlucky her, whatever the case may be. And we will be seeing her again next week. And for today, Carrie and I are going to have a great discussion about something that affects every single one of us, and it's aging. I'll just say it straight out there. So how that relates to what we can do with the system of Reiki, or how we work with the system of Reiki, can help us as well with aging. For me, aging is very much about change. And that is something that we definitely work a lot with within the system of Reiki, to try to get our heads around the fact that we are not the same every single moment of this life. In fact, we are different, and different things are happening to us. And as we get older, a lot older, then we actually start to see this going in instead of a building up way physically, we start to see it in a degenerative way physically. So how we can deal with things like that as well. Carrie and I were just chatting about it. Carrie, I'm going to tell them your age so that they can all do what I did and go, no, really? Carrie's 42. So I didn't think that, right? And I mean, we can say, oh, you look great for your age, which you look amazing for your age, right? And I was actually looking at your picture and I thought, God, she looks like her daughter. And how old's your daughter?
She's 4.
So you're like a little 4-year-old, but a little bit older. And Carrie was just saying, that she's just sort of starting to notice that I guess, when we're young, what we want to do is grow up, right? And now we hit a point, I guess, where we start noticing that things are changing in the other direction. And that is just plain old strange. How do we get our heads around that, Carrie?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out, Bronwen. So I thought we'd have a chat about it. I think you have some wisdom to share with me on this topic, but just because you're, I think, a few years down the road beyond me, in terms of grappling with this whole strange thing called life, where you feel like you're 4 years old still, but you're in a 42-year-old's body, and we're not going to be here forever, right? So it's a hard thing to grapple with. And I think for women especially, it's there's a lot of subversive cultural tendencies to make us feel even more ashamed of aging, to feel that age is that we're not really allowed to age gracefully, or just as naturally as we can. Like, it's like, aging gracefully has become, plastic surgery and Botox, and maybe a feeling like I only can feel strong and in love with my body if it looks a certain way, feels a certain way. But I know I was like in the shower the other day and I come across another like roll on my skin and like it looked like I might be gaining some weight, and that it's like kind of becoming a permanent indent in my body. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was just a wake-up call. Yes, that change is happening for me, and life is happening. Gravity is happening both in my body, on my face, and actually internally in my body too, because I've always struggled with a lot of muscular skeletal pain, and that pain just seems to get more and more as I get older. And I've been thinking about this too, because I have this there's a song that I've been listening to by Mihaly, and I just really love the way he described it. He says that, it feels cold and I feel old, and all these gray hairs, they warm my soul. And even all these lines on my face feel brand new. I've been carving them my whole life through.
Mm.
And I just love that thought about how, how we can look at aging a little bit differently with a lot more joy and gratitude for our life. Um, Kind of reminds me actually of visiting the temple on Mount Karama when I went to Japan recently. And when we were going touring through the temple, you go down the steps and kind of into the belly of the temple, and there's these urns, like all like that line the walls of the temple. And it's customary to take a lock of your hair, cut off a lock of your hair, and put it inside that urn. If that's where you choose to be your final resting place. But the symbology of that is to be grateful for our life. And, I think healthy aging is that, right? It should be this gratitude for like, oh gosh, that worry line on my forehead must mean that, you know, I've had a lot of people to care about and worries to work through, right? So I agree with you too. I think it's a lot about how easy we can accept change. Change is always happening, of course, but it's challenging. It's challenging to ride with change. We want to keep things the same. That's my tendency. I think it's a human tendency, but we can't do that.
I've seen it in my life. And when I've probably noticed it most is from having a child. And I remember when my child was like a baby and thinking, oh, how am I going to cope with this? It was just so different. And, whatever was going on at that time, maybe it's in the afternoon at 5 o'clock where you're sitting by yourself with a baby and the baby's been crying half the day and you're just tired. And I'm like, how do I deal with this? What do I, but I mean, as you and I both know, babies are only babies for a very short period of time. But in that moment, it feels like that moment stretches out forever, right? And I remember thinking, shit, this feels like forever. And another part of me saying, but it's not, it can't be. And then, like a month down the line going, it's so weird that I felt like that. But I can pinpoint moments in my life where things have felt like in my head that nothing is changing and that I'm stuck somewhere or something, but it's not. And it's very hard for us to realize that that's not the case and that things are always moving, shifting. And the more that we can understand that, the more resilient we become, the better we can flow with it rather than hold ourselves, because feeling that actually holds us in that space, doesn't it? So if we can get it in our heads, because our minds are so powerful, that no, nothing is more than what this is right now. I might be feeling like shit right now, but it's just momentary. And there's no way that this is going to be replicated throughout my whole life. It's impossible. So our minds can really help us. And, things like depression and whatever, I think that just understanding that life is this ever shifting, flowing thing. And the more that we give over to that, I don't know what stops us from doing that. There must be some teaching to us as humans that maybe we're taught as kids something about this. What do you think?
Well, I think some of it potentially could be kind of a cultural difference between Eastern and Western societies, potentially. I think about Buddhism, and two fundamental concepts within Buddhism are that we're interconnected, right? We're interconnected, and we see that also show up in the system of Reiki. And then also the other really foundational principle of Buddhism is that life is impermanent, and that change is always happening. And that maybe that worldview is more permeated through society. But I think Yeah, like I said, I'm not really sure why. I think it's this, standard of beauty that is kind of placed on women's shoulders. And some, I think, historically in the West and maybe in other cultures too, that we put so much emphasis on beauty, and that don't and see aging as kind of the antithesis of that. And that's unfortunate. I think of my grandmother, when she was in her 90s. She's passed on now, but I thought she was so beautiful. She still was. She was the most beautiful woman in my mind, and her in her 90s was more endearing. And I'd see pictures of her in her 20s, and through her whole life. She was a model at one point, I think, in her life. And she's just beautiful. She's beautiful at every age, but it's not this external beauty. It's also that soul cellular beauty that shines through, especially for people we love. But we should be able to see that in everything. And I have there's a it's summertime here where I live, and on Sundays, every Sunday, there's a fair in town, and I've been having a booth, and supporting my Reiki practice, or just promoting my Reiki practice through this booth. And what I love to do is just watch the people, and just see all different types of people. I love people. And it doesn't matter what people look like. There's this inner beauty, I think, that really shines through. And I wish there was more of that, more celebration of that in our culture, in Hollywood, and the movies we consume, and the subliminal messages that they really do contain, and kind of take that on subconsciously, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole thing about us looking, how we look is such a external factor. It's not really, it's only a small part of who we are. And as you say, it is that inside that makes us so potent and interesting, or whatever it might be. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I was just thinking back, when I was in India, you were saying about the cultural differences. I noticed when I was in India that, it was very interesting to see people's attitude to life and existence, and how different that was. That I could see that in my society, that we were really grasping, or we are really grasping onto things to try to hold on to things, where in India it felt very much more like, oh well, that's just the way that it is, and from my background, to be like, no, you can't think like that. We can change that. We can do this, we could do that, but Indians were very much more into a just a, I don't know what would the word be, but an acceptance of the things that are happening in the world, in their world, and which is actually much more going with the flow. And it does mean that there were situations where if someone's dying, they allowed that more to happen, rather than to fight that like we might do, for example. And I was talking to my brother who lives in Laos, and he was telling me of someone who had died recently, and that it was from something really simple. And he said, if I'd have been there, I would have done something about that. But no one, this extended family, didn't do anything about it, because it was just like, oh well, and it's just that we think in quite different ways in that sense. And we are fighting for longevity, for example, but what is the quality of that longevity? And how do we know? I mean, this is probably more about death, but I mean, how do we know when is the right time? And I think these are, you have to, what are they called? Death directives, something like that. If you go to in for something surgical, for example, and they'll say, well, what's your, death directive. So do you want to be allowed to die, or do you want us to do, you know, and you have to think about these things. And I think for us, that's a very tough decision, because most people wouldn't possibly not want to just die. They probably think, oh no, you know, we need to fight that. And I've had experiences of that in my life, for example, with my mother, who had an enormous cerebral bleed way back in 2009, and she had a 50% chance of surviving that. And I myself, weirdly enough, felt like, I think that I should just let her go. And I was probably the closest person to her. And then relatives around me started saying, oh no, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so we had to give them we had to give the doctors the right to operate. And so we did. And you know, then my mum lived in this twilight zone for well, until that was for 12 years, you know. So, and I don't think that's what my mum would have wanted, to be honest, you know. And but it's very difficult, you know. I think if, you know, if we'd have been in a different country, possibly, you know, in India or Laos or somewhere, that would not have been the case. And we would have said our goodbyes and allowed her to leave peacefully, and with all our love there, and her having lived an amazing life. So, you know, there's a lot of different feelings about all of this. I don't know, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. It's you know, it's just questions that we grapple with, you know, and I don't think that there's really one right answer or wrong
Yeah.
answer. But I think, you know, it speaks to this kind of generational process, right? Too. And I remember when I was a kid and I saw my great aunts and great grandparents and my grandparents, and they looked so old, but like I kind of had all this sense that they were always going to be that age, you know. To see them grow, you know, age, and you know, even more. And then you know, maybe it was over a process of about 10 years, my grandparents started to pass away, and now I have no grandparents left in that generation. And
Mhm.
I think I have one like great one great uncle who is like the last brother of my grandfather. And so like pretty soon he's kind of like that last remaining piece of that generation. And it's a beautiful thing, I think, to witness, you know, like their life from that younger generation perspective, and to see them transition. And then now I'm seeing my parents, kind of what you were talking about, you know, struggling with old age. My mom got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and her health has really declined over the last few years, and she's in a lot of pain. You know, it causes a lot of pain, and it's so hard. And and sometimes when I see people from an older generation, I feel like they're so courageous, because they're kind of standing, like they're still in their body, but they're standing kind of right at that gateway between now and the infinite, and they hold that mystery inside of them, but they also have lived this long, beautiful life. And I don't know what that feels like. I honestly don't know. I'll check in like in 40 more years and I'll know more about how that feels. But
I think a lot of it has to do with acceptance. And if we can accept our situation, so even what I was just saying about my mum, then it was up to me actually to accept what happened, because I found it very difficult. Then, you know, you have your parent in this sort of space that you feel like, no, they shouldn't be living in that space. And it took me years to accept that. And I think I sort of came to some, you know, I did come to an acceptance, but it did take me a very long time. And that's once again that holding on, not moving with, even if things go wrong, not giving over to that and going, okay, what happened may not have been the right thing, but hey, that has happened and we can't change those things. So how do we sit in this moment now, and that we will always come back to the precepts with these things. So to be, as we said, just here now, and not trying to think about, well, how's that going to play out, or how did that play out? That's really not going to be any more helpful to me in this exact moment. And I looked after my mum for 5 years, and I found that really, really incredibly difficult. And I felt like it was very hard for me to feel like I was there completely for her in those moments. And because of holding on to a lot of other things in my life, and we can you can't berate yourself for that. You can only ever learn from these things and allow them to be something that hopefully becomes more ingrained in us, that though we are in this physical world, it's not all about the physical, and we need to be able to let the mind, I think, be more fluid and not be stuck. I think I love the fact that we're physical, and that's that whole aging thing. And as you said, it can be really beautiful. It can also be painful. But if we can allow the mind to not get stuck in the physical world. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes I think that the physical world can be quite a solid thing, and it feels like a very permanent thing. It's sort of more like the permanent aspect for now. And yet we have these other aspects to us, so we have this mental aspect to us, and of course the breath, just allowing the breath to flow easily and freely, that these other aspects to us need to be given space and the opportunity to move and be free. And that's part of the precepts as well. So, not holding on to the anger or the worry, or and being grateful that we can just be here right now.
Grateful for our life and the weird twisted ways it turns and the changes that happen. I agree. I think Reiki's really helped me with that. I don't know what I would do without Reiki in that sense. And kind of going back to my trip with Japan, I felt like, because my kid's basically been in this baby phase, right? And I took my oldest kiddo, to the dentist recently, and they were like, "Oh, he has 2 loose teeth." And I was like, "Whoa, wait." I was like, wait, I'm not ready for this, right?
Physicality thing again. Yeah, it's interesting.
Physicality thing, right? And I remember when those teeth came in, and they're these 2 bottom teeth, and they're just like wiggling there, and they're so precious to me because they represent that whole time that I went through, that yes, that felt like it was going to go on forever and that was never going to end, but it was so challenging, yet so much filled with oxytocin and love and connection to this, to be, or that privilege really, to support somebody to grow into the human that they're going to become. And feel that that's kind of a part of me too, happening, and or even regenerating in that sense. Like, seeing my kids grow up is like kind of like revisiting myself growing up. And it's been a real healing process. Well, anyways, and then when I went to Japan, I had this intuition, this thought that something that's happening, and what the healing is happening for me is that I'm preparing to let my kids get into this next level, or this next stage of their growth, And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But while I was there, I bought a lot of trinkets to like put their teeth in. I'm like, soon they're going to be all falling out. Right. And lo and behold, about a month after we got back, these 2 teeth just totally popped out, and it held just that one little tooth. And I don't know, I had so much significance, emotional significance, but yet what are you going to do about it? You know, it's not like I can be like, oh wait, stop, no, you can't grow up, and I'm just going to push that little tooth right back in your mouth. Like, there has to be some acceptance, right, of the natural progression of life. And as my kids age, I feel like we're all kind of propelling ourselves through, you know, that generational movement through life. But it does require a resiliency, a fluidity. And I think some people might have that more than others. I think that Reiki really has supported me in that, you know, because it's like, how much can I really mourn over my kid's tooth being gone? It's a moment for sure, but I'm also really enjoying his little smile with a couple missing teeth. It's pretty cute too.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah. So that whole thing of change, I think yeah, it's very beautiful. I think also I was just thinking that, you know, you mentioned at the beginning about being women and change. You know, I do actually, I'll just say about men before I talk about women, but I think that they were saying that, you know, that I think men are going through a really difficult phase at the moment, and that there is I think being an older man in this world today can be a bit of a lonely, difficult time, as the rest of us catch up in a sense to being empowered. You know, they've been in a state of being empowered through the rest of us for a long time, and I feel like as things change, it is becoming more difficult for men. And so aging for men, I think, might be a really difficult time, and can lead to, you know, depression and you know, just loneliness, I think. So it is difficult for men. And for women, you know, for us, we have a different sort of thing that happens for us, and that is that our bodies change. And I know that, well, Carrie, you're 42. I think 49 is like the normal age of where women start going into menopause, perimenopause. And you know, when I went through that, I went through it at exactly 49 and started going through it. So that was incredible, that thing of change again. And you know what, that's an interesting one. I was talking about, you know, people, you know, women getting their periods, right? When you think of women and they talk about women like in the movies, women are always I'm going to say the word virile, which sounds wrong. Fertile is the word I'm looking for, right? So yeah, so women are always fertile. Women are, you know, it's always women, you know, the possibility of getting pregnant, because you're a woman. Well, actually, with the way that the world has changed now, and that we are so much, we get so much older, you know, that period of life is just a section of our lives. And yet that's what it's considered to be a woman. Well, actually, you know, what I've found in getting older, I mean, no, it's not, you know, that it's just a section of a woman's life. Our life is just so much more than that. And that's interesting, because coming to terms with that is an interesting aspect. And to realize that, oh, I'm still a woman. Because it was a bit like, oh, you're not a woman if you don't have your periods as an adult. You know what I mean? Like that idea. So I found that quite mind-blowing. And the fact is, you know, I still have this whole life ahead of me, and it's got nothing to do with having babies. Oh, amazing, right? And we don't really appreciate that about women in the world today. And you know, that whole changing thing of going through menopause. Men go through something called andropause, which is a change, but it's not in any way, nothing like what we have to go through. And I actually don't even know if they get any symptoms. They must have some symptoms since they've called it a name, but it must be minuscule. But for us, you know, the enormous change of of not having your periods, not being able to get pregnant, and your body physically changing that, to something that is also not considered possibly feminine, right? I mean, like I see pictures of one of these English actresses, and she's quite old now. I can't think which one. Anyway, she looks absolutely freaking amazing. But in reality, she still looks like a little girl, and she looks like a little girl with wrinkles, which is nice. But most of us don't look like little girls anymore. Our bodies actually change into, into something that's totally different again. And the acceptance of that. How do we accept that? It's certainly not considered to be, you're either this fertile woman or you're an old granny, right? I don't talk like this, but you know what I mean? Like, you're meant to talk like that the minute that you turn 50. I mean, really insane, because that's not what we are. And we are so much more than that. And I think that, women are really coming into their power with that, understanding that. And that is a part of an acceptance in society, more and more of that, and the empowerment of women, the acceptance of change in us and who we are. And, as I always say, 80% of Reiki practitioners are women. So we are out there working on ourselves. And if you looked at the age group, it's pretty much like, I don't know, 40 or 45 plus is like the big age group of women who practice a system of Reiki. We are the ones who are doing it. We are the ones who are working on ourselves, thinking about self-care, helping others, really digging into ourselves. I'm very proud to be a part of that cohort.
Yeah, me too, for sure. There's so much that you said there that I think is so interesting. And one of it is, I think, to not assume that men aren't struggling with aging either, and I remember when I was some of my friends in high school and just guy friends that I had really good connection with, they've said, I always felt like this sense that there was no coming of age for me. There was no like moment where I was being celebrated as like, transforming from a child into a man. And that there's kind of a lack of celebration around that. And I really have to agree with that. And, or that maybe at some point you just start to look like a man, and that those expectations of fatherhood, manhood, whatever, of the masculine culture is kind of started to put more and more on your shoulders. I can imagine that that'd be difficult too. And I think also with fatherhood, I noticed, and I never knew that this was a thing, but when, like, this transition to become a mother is a huge one. And if you've gone through that, that like, it's not necessarily easy, but women kind of have this like 9-month gestation period, 10-month gestation period, right? To kind of prepare for that. And for most men, it doesn't really register for them either biologically or, mentally until the baby is here, right? And like the thing, the thing that's going to happen is already is happening, and that's when and so I think a lot of men have mental health issues during that time. They have like anxiety attacks, and there's just a lot of instability, can be to bring, to hold space and bring that, baby into the world. So I think it's good to keep our mind on that, that, it's not just a feminine thing, and I'm sure it impacts men. And also because of our society and culture, that to talk about it, communicate about it, share about it, you have to have a lot of courage, to bring that forward. And I think more men should bring it forward, but in the meantime, we'll be doing it, right? So, but as far as what you were talking about Reiki practitioners and the majority being women, and I agree with you. I think it's there's so many women trying to change change the discourse around aging, around empowerment. And I know, like, I've even, when I was in my 20s and 30s teaching yoga, one of my most dedicated students were middle-aged women. Were there working out all the time because it really helped them, navigate that time in their life. So many of my clients, middle-aged women, and so many people who gravitate to the practice of Reiki are women. And I think it's a lot to do with the power of Reiki and the healing that is contained in it. Not to say that men aren't a part of our circle or part of our community. And I think there should be space for the masculine in the world of healing and spiritual healing. But yeah, this podcast is a lot about, breaking down barriers, right? And creating more opportunities for women in the world of Reiki, more of a voice for women in spiritual healing. And it is really important to be a part of that and to look more closely. Well, why women? Why does a practice like Reiki, really support and serve women at that age or that time in their life? And I think the discourse is changing, right? I actually just watched a movie the other day, The Other Boleyn Girl. It's been on Netflix, and it's a period piece about Anne Boleyn and Mary Boleyn. And it was so interesting to hear kind of some of the generic cultural dialogue that's happening inside of that movie, whereas like a woman's worth was based on how many children she had, how many boy children she had, and in particular, in this case, 2 women who were queens at the time, queens of an empire. And because they didn't have a male heir, they were both like decapitated basically. And by just, very, what's the word? Where you just feel like, entitlement, entitled men who feel like that they just deserve to have a male heir, which is like completely goes against all biological principles. And most of the time, actually, the reason why they're not having a male heir is because of their sperm. It's only female sperm. So ha ha ha, joke's on us. But it's just interesting how much value was put into that's the woman's value, is the women, children you have, and how many male heirs you have. And I think that's true in other cultures, right? Like if you think about China, for example, right? That pressure to have just one child and have it be male is a huge problem in their society and a huge issue
now. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But so that quest, to find a sense of self-worth as women as we age, I think that there's a lot that we're pushing against, and so compassion for that, for sure. That kind of ideology is somehow written inside of us, but yet practices like Reiki can help us rewrite the script, right? Rewrite how we feel about that. And
I wonder how this fits into the, the archetype of the crone. So, the old wise woman. I mean, but like I said, even then, we seem to have to go from this to that. Do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like there's no opportunity to just be a woman, maybe. Otherwise we do have to be this old, whatever. Well, I don't know, maybe one day.
I don't know the answer, but life is beautiful, and it is such a privilege that we have these beautiful bodies and to do things like jump on a call on Zoom and hang out with you for an hour down in Australia and me in California and have these conversations that I hope that that supports you, our listeners, to think more critically about, maybe some of the subconscious narratives that we have around aging, and feel more strong and empowered in our lives as we move through.
Be yourself, who you are right now. I think that's really what it is, right? And yes, absolutely. Carrie, thank you so much for sharing the conversation today. That was fun. And yes, it's time for us to go. So we'll see you all again next week. And don't forget to, share this. Hey, that's a really lovely idea. Share it with some other women, men, whoever, someone who'll get something out of this. Join in the conversation, put some comments down, like it, do all those beautiful things. And we'll see you all next week. Bye for now.